The quiet alien settlement was disturbed by the sound of an approaching battle. The humans, who had been assigned to help protect the colonies, were stationed at the outer edges, preparing for any trouble that might come their way. Among them was a skilled warrior, a man whose life had been shaped by combat and survival. He had seen countless battles, each one as brutal as the last, but nothing could prepare him for the chaos that was about to unfold. It was a peaceful morning when the first attack happened. Out of nowhere, a group of alien raiders descended upon the settlement. The warriors of the settlement were skilled, but the attackers were ruthless and well-prepared. The raiders struck fast, catching many of the inhabitants by surprise. The warrior immediately took action. He sprinted towards the sound of the battle, his heart racing but his mind focused. His mission was clear: to protect the people of this settlement at all costs. He wasn't just fighting for duty anymore. Something deep inside him made him want to ensure these innocent lives were safe. As he neared the center of the chaos, he saw it. The Queen's young, her child, her precious offspring, was alone in the midst of the attack. The warriors of Dir. The settlement had abandoned their posts to defend against the attackers, leaving the child vulnerable and unprotected. The warrior's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he rushed forward, charging into the line of fire. Gunshots and explosions erupted around him, but he didn't care. His focus was solely on the child, who was frozen in place, unable to move or understand the danger around them. The warrior threw himself in front of the child just as an enemy warrior lunged toward them with a sharp blade. He raised his weapon, deflecting the blow with a swift movement. The attacker barely had time to react before the warrior's sword struck true, sending them crashing to the ground. With one enemy down, the warrior scooped the child into his arms, holding them tightly against his chest. He moved quickly, darting between explosions and incoming fire, every step calculated. His mind was on autopilot, pushing his body beyond its limits to reach a safe spot. The child didn't make a sound. Their wide eyes locked onto the warrior's face, still too young to understand the danger they had just escaped. But the warrior knew. He knew how precious this life was and how much the child meant to the Queen. As he reached a nearby shelter, the warrior carefully placed the child inside and shielded them with his own body. Sweat dripped from his brow, but he didn't pause for a break. He could hear the sounds of battle still raging outside, but for the moment the child was safe. The warrior didn't think about the consequences of his actions. He wasn't worried about the possibility of death or injury. His only thought was that this child, who was the future of the settlement, had to survive. He wasn't sure how long the shelter would hold, but he made a promise to himself that he would fight until the very end. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The fighting outside was relentless, but the warrior stayed with the child, his hand gently resting on their head to keep them calm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds of battle began to fade. The Queen's forces had driven back the raiders and the enemy was retreating. The warrior sighed in relief but didn't let his guard down. Not until he saw the Queen herself. When she entered the shelter, she was covered in the dust and blood of battle, her expression hard and focused. But when her eyes fell on her child, unharmed and resting peacefully, something in her softened. The warrior's heart skipped a beat. He didn't expect the Queen to thank him. After all, he had just done his duty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The Queen knelt beside the child, brushing a lock of hair from their face. She looked up at the warrior, her gaze intense. "You saved my child," she said, her voice cold but not without a trace of gratitude. The warrior only nodded. "I did what I had to do," he replied, keeping his emotions in check. He wasn't here for recognition or praise. He was here to protect. But as the Queen looked at him, he could sense a deep respect growing in her eyes, something more than mere formality. She seemed to study him for a long moment, her sharp gaze reading every inch of his face, as if weighing his worth. For a brief moment, there was an unspoken connection between them, one that the warrior couldn't explain. He was just a soldier, doing his job. She was the ruler of a powerful alien race, a being far beyond him in status and influence. And yet in that moment, they were connected by something deeper. "Your bravery has not gone unnoticed," she said at last, her tone softer now. You will be rewarded. The warrior stood silently, unsure of what that meant. He had never been one to seek rewards, and yet something about the queen's words made him feel uneasy. He wasn't sure if she meant it as a formality, or if there was something more to her words. Still, he remained humble. As the queen turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder at him once more. Stay close, she said, her voice low and commanding. We will need you. The warrior watched her leave, still processing everything that had just happened. In his mind, he had simply done what any protector would have done in his position. But as he stood there, with the child safely in the shelter, he realized that he had unknowingly stepped into something far bigger than himself. The queen's words echoed in his mind, and though he tried to push them away, a part of him couldn't help but wonder what role he would play in her life next. The battle had ended, but the dust from the fight still hung in the air. The warrior stood at the edge of the settlement, watching as the alien soldiers cleaned up the aftermath. The sky above had gone from the dark clouds of war to a clear blue, but the quiet after the chaos felt unsettling. The warrior had saved the queen's child, but he knew there was more to come. He could feel that something had changed since the moment he'd protected the child. There was no going back now. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to find the queen herself, walking toward him with a calm yet determined look on her face. She was flanked by two of her closest guards, but there was no mistaking the intensity in her gaze as it met his. The warrior stood tall, not sure what to expect, but instinctively ready for whatever might come next. As the queen came closer, she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied him for a moment, her eyes lingering on his face as though searching for something. Her expression softened for just an instant before returning to its usual seriousness. She had a way of looking at him that was both piercing and strangely understanding, like she saw more in him than he realized. You did well today, she said, her voice cool but not without a hint of appreciation. You protected my young. For that, I owe you my thanks. The warrior was taken aback. The words were simple, but there was something about the way she said them that made him feel different. This wasn't just a queen thanking a soldier. There was a depth to her words that spoke of something more. He nodded in response, unsure of what to say. It was my duty, he replied simply. He wasn't one for grand speeches or seeking praise. His life had always been about action, not recognition. The queen's eyes softened as she took another step toward him, her gaze never leaving his face. Your duty goes beyond what anyone expected, and for that you deserve more than just thanks. The warrior felt a twinge of unease at her words. What did she mean? Was there something more she expected from him? Or was she simply offering the formal gratitude of a ruler to her subject? Before he could speak, the queen gestured for him to follow her. Without waiting for an answer, she began walking toward a large, imposing building at the center of the settlement. The warrior hesitated for a moment, then followed. His mind raced as he walked beside her, trying to figure out what was happening. They reached the building, a grand structure that stood out among the simpler dwellings around it. The queen led him inside, and he was immediately struck by the contrast between the calm inside and the destruction he had just witnessed outside. The building was elegant, with high ceilings and walls covered in intricate alien designs. Soft lights bathed the room in a golden glow, and a faint scent of flowers lingered in the air. It felt almost peaceful, an odd thing to experience after the chaos of battle. The queen motioned for him to sit, and he did so cautiously. She stood before him, her posture regal, but there was something different in her demeanor. She wasn't just the ruler of her people right now. She was a woman who had witnessed the protection of her child, and that had clearly affected her. I want to know more about you, she said, her voice steady but curious. What made you rush into the battle without a second thought for your own safety? Why did you risk your life for my young? The warrior met her gaze, unsure of how to answer. He had acted purely on instinct without thinking of consequences. To him, it was simple. The child was vulnerable, and it was his job to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He didn't expect thanks or recognition. "I was trained to protect," he said slowly. "It's what I do. When I saw the child in danger, everything else faded away. I just had to act." The Queen nodded thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving his face. "I can see that. But there's more to you, isn't there? You don't seem like just any soldier. You have something inside you, something different." The warrior shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He didn't know how to respond to that. He had never been one to share his thoughts or emotions with anyone. He had always kept his distance, both physically and emotionally. But there was something about the Queen that made him want to open up, even if just a little. "I've seen too much," he said quietly, his voice low. "Too much death. Too much loss. It changes you. It makes you guarded." The Queen's expression softened, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of empathy in her eyes. "I understand. Leading. My people, I've seen things I wish I could forget. But I've learned that we cannot hide from the things that shape us. We must accept them, even if they make us feel weaker." The warrior looked at her in surprise. He had expected the Queen to dismiss his feelings, to act as if she were above such emotions. But instead she seemed to understand him in a way that no one ever had. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't sure how to process. "You're not weak," he replied, his voice more confident now. "You're strong. You lead with wisdom and courage." The Queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as though trying to read him. Finally, she spoke again, this time with a quiet authority. "Strength is not just about power," she said softly. "True strength comes from understanding others, understanding yourself. I see that in you, warrior." Her words hung in the air between them, and the warrior felt a shift within himself. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he felt a strange sense of respect for the Queen growing inside him. She wasn't just a ruler. She was someone who understood the weight of responsibility, the burden of leadership, and somehow she saw something in him that he hadn't even noticed in himself. As the Queen turned to leave, she paused and glanced over her shoulder at him. "Stay close," she said softly. "You may be needed again sooner than you think." The warrior nodded, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions and questions. He didn't know what the future held, but he could feel the pull of something deeper, something that had begun the moment he protected her child. The Queen's words echoed in his mind, as he stood there knowing that his role in her life had only just begun. Over the next few days, the warrior found himself spending more time with the Queen's child. After the attack, the child had become a symbol of safety and hope for the settlement, but to the warrior, the child was simply a vulnerable life that needed protecting. The warrior didn't think of himself as a hero, but as someone who had a job to do. Still, every time he interacted with the child, he felt a growing sense of attachment. He would sit with the child, talking to them, or sometimes just watching them play. The child's innocence, their curiosity about the world, and their laughter made the warrior feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It was a feeling that was unfamiliar to him, but one he welcomed. There was something about the child's presence that calmed his troubled mind, something that made the horrors of the battle he'd fought seem a distant memory. As he spent more time with the child, the Queen began to notice the change in him. She had always seen him as a soldier, someone capable of great strength and determination. But now she saw another side of him. She watched him with her child, how his demeanor softened, how the hardness in his eyes faded whenever he was near them. It was as if the warrior was learning to open up, bit by bit, in a way he had never done before. One afternoon, the Queen sought him out. She found him sitting on a bench in the gardens, the child by his side, both of them watching the stars begin to appear in the sky as the sun set. The warrior didn't notice the Queen approaching until she was right beside him. "I see you've become quite fond of my young," she said, her voice soft but steady. The warrior looked up at her, his expression neutral. "They are a reminder of why we fight," he replied. a future that deserves to be protected. The queen stood beside him for a moment, staring up at the sky. "You know," she said after a pause, "it's not just about protection. You're giving them something more. You're showing them love." The warrior shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," he said, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Nothing more." The queen turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "I think it's more than that," she said quietly. "I see the way you look at them, the way you care for them. It's not just a duty to you. It's something deeper." For a moment, the warrior didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as someone capable of showing love or tenderness. He was a soldier, a protector, someone who kept others at arm's length. But when it came to this child, he couldn't help but feel a deep connection. It was like the child had unlocked something in him, something he hadn't known was there. The queen's words lingered in his mind as he spent more time with the child. He had always prided himself on being strong, on being able to keep his emotions in check. But around the child, around the queen, things were different. He didn't know why, but he felt more vulnerable, more open, and it was something he struggled to understand. Meanwhile, the queen herself had begun to change too. She had always been a ruler, someone who had to maintain control, always distant from those around her. But as she watched the warrior interact with her child, she saw a side of him that made her feel something she hadn't expected: admiration. She had seen many warriors, many soldiers, but none like him. He wasn't just strong, he was kind. He was capable of caring, of putting his own needs aside for the sake of someone else. It wasn't something she had expected to find in a soldier, and it made her rethink everything she had believed about leadership and power. Maybe strength wasn't just about ruling with an iron fist. Maybe it was about understanding others, about showing compassion even when it was hard. One evening, after the child had gone to sleep, the queen found herself seeking out the warrior once again. This time she didn't want to thank him or give him orders. She wanted to talk, to understand him better. She found him in the same spot where they had spoken before, sitting alone in the garden. He was looking at the stars, lost in thought. The queen stood at a distance for a moment, watching him, wondering what was going on inside his head. Finally, she stepped forward. "Why do you keep your distance from me?" she asked, her voice gentle, but direct. The warrior turned his head toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't keep my distance," he replied. "I do my job and I stay out of the way." The queen frowned. "That's not what I mean. I see the way you act around the child. You care for them, you protect them. But when it comes to me, you're always distant, always cold." The warrior remained silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. "You're the queen," he said quietly. "I'm just a soldier. There's no reason for us to be close." The queen studied him closely, sensing that there was more to his words than he was letting on. "You think that because I'm a ruler, we can't be close?" she asked, her voice softening. "You think that because I wear a crown, I'm not a person, like you?" The warrior didn't know what to say. He had never thought of it that way. To him, the queen had always been someone to be respected, someone to keep his distance from. But as he looked at her, standing before him, he began to wonder if there was more to their relationship than he had realized. Could they truly be more than just a ruler and a soldier? "You are more than just a ruler," he said quietly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "You're strong. You lead with power, but I've seen that there's more to you. There's something else." The queen smiled softly, her gaze lingering on him. "And what about you?" she asked, her tone teasing. "What about the man who protects my child with such devotion?" The warrior felt his heart skip a beat. "I'm just doing my duty," he said, though his words felt hollow now. The queen reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. "Your duty may have brought you here," she said, "but your heart has kept you close." For the first time, the warrior allowed himself to truly look at her, not just as a queen, but as a woman. He could feel a shift inside him, an unfamiliar but powerful pull toward her. It was something he had never expected, something he wasn't sure how to handle. But in that moment he realized that everything had changed. The bond between them had deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated, and it was no longer just about duty or protection. It was about something far more complicated, something neither of them could ignore. The days following the conversation in the garden were strange. The warrior found himself thinking more about the queen than he ever had before. Every time they spoke, there was a tension between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them acknowledged outright. The queen had made it clear that she saw something in him, something different from the other soldiers. But the warrior wasn't sure if he was ready to let that something grow into anything more. The queen, too, seemed to be wrestling with her feelings. She had always been a leader, always distant from her people in order to maintain control. But, as time passed, she found herself drawn to the warrior in ways that both scared and intrigued her. She had never allowed herself to get close to anyone, but with him, it felt different. He wasn't just a soldier to her anymore. He was someone who had proven himself in ways that went beyond his strength. One evening, after a long day of meetings, the queen called the warrior to her private chambers. He wasn't sure what to expect, but when he arrived, he found her standing by a large window, looking out over the peaceful settlement below. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, and for a moment, the warrior forgot the weight of the world around them. "You wanted to see me, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice respectful but with a hint of curiosity. The queen turned toward him, her expression serious. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I need to talk to you about something important." The warrior's heart raced. He wasn't sure what this was about, but he had a feeling it wasn't going to be just another command. He waited for her to continue, his gaze fixed on her, waiting for her next words. "I've been thinking about the way you've protected my child," she said, her voice quieter now. "The way you've cared for them. I'm grateful for that, but I need to ask you something personal." The warrior felt a strange sense of unease. He wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but he knew that it was important. "What do you need, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice low. The queen took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "I've seen how you've changed since you started spending time with my child," she said, her voice steady. "You've become more than just a protector. You've become part of our family, and I can't ignore that anymore." The warrior was stunned. He hadn't expected this. "I'm just doing my job," he said quickly, his voice almost a whisper. "Nothing more." The queen reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. "I don't think it's just duty anymore. I think you've become something more to me, and I need you to understand that." The warrior looked at her, unsure of how to respond. His heart raced, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. He had never expected to be in a position where the queen of an entire people would see him as anything more than a soldier. "I know this is sudden," the queen continued, "but I'm not asking you to be just a protector anymore. I'm asking you to stay close, to be part of our lives in a way that goes beyond what we've shared so far." For a long moment, the warrior stood silently, processing her words. This wasn't just a request, it was an offer that could change everything for him. He had never expected this kind of connection with anyone, least of all the queen. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want to walk away from her, from this chance to be part of something bigger than himself. "You want me to stay by your side," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The queen nodded. "Yes, I want you here, with us. Not just as a soldier, but as someone who matters to me." The warrior's heart beat faster. He didn't know what to say. He had never been in a position where someone had offered him so much. But in that moment, he realized that his feelings for her had grown too strong to ignore. He wanted to stay. He wanted to be by her side, to protect her and her child. Not because it was his duty, but because it felt right. "I will stay," he said finally, his voice firm and steady. "I will protect you and your child. I will be here by your side." The queen smiled softly, and for the first time, the warrior saw something in her eyes that wasn't just about leadership. It was something warmer, something that made his heart swell with emotion. She had trusted him with her child, and now she was trusting him with something far deeper. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and filled with gratitude. "You've made a choice that will change everything." And with that, the warrior knew that his life and the queen's would never be the same again. The days after the warrior's declaration felt like a blur. His life, once simple and focused solely on protecting the settlement, had taken an unexpected turn. Now, his bond with the queen and her child had grown into something much more complicated. He wasn't just a protector anymore. He was someone the queen had come to rely on, someone she had chosen to keep by her side. And though he had once thought that nothing would change him, he now realized that everything had. But with the newfound closeness came new challenges. The warrior found himself questioning everything he had known about himself, about his duty, and about his place in the queen's world. He had never imagined that he would be in a position to have such an influence on her life. But now it seemed that his role was far more significant than he could have ever expected. One evening, as the settlement settled into the quiet of the night, the queen summoned him once more. This time he could sense the seriousness in her tone, the weight of something important about to unfold. He made his way to her chambers, his heart racing with anticipation. When he arrived, the queen was standing by the large window once again, staring out into the darkness. The room was still, the air thick with the sense of something about to change. "You've made your choice," the queen said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "And now I have to make mine." The warrior felt a knot tighten in his chest. What was she about to say? The queen turned to face him, her eyes locked onto his. "I've seen what you've done, what you've sacrificed, and now I have to make a decision that will affect all of us. I've decided that you will stay by my side, not just as a protector, but as my equal." The warrior was stunned. He hadn't expected this. Equal? He had always seen himself as someone who simply followed orders, who did what was necessary without seeking anything in return. But now the queen was offering him something far more profound. "I will stand by you," he said quietly, his voice full of determination. "I will protect you and your child. I will be here for whatever you need." The queen's gaze softened, and for the first time, the warrior saw the full depth of her emotions. She wasn't just the leader of her people. She was a woman who had come to trust him in a way that went beyond duty, beyond protection. "I trust you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I will need you now more than ever." As she stepped forward, the warrior knew that his life had changed completely. What had started as a simple duty had evolved into something far more significant. He wasn't just a protector anymore. He was part of her life. And from that moment on, he would fight for her, not because it was his job, but because he had come to care for her in ways he had never expected.